Hi everyone. Winston forgot to tell you that we were going to do the presentation in Spanish, but Steve told us not to. So I'm very excited to introduce Shelley, and going on what David just said about creative thinking, because what Shelley is going to talk about is about creative parenting. She's the adopted mother of 3 children. She has a very impressive bio. I won't read it all, but I want to say she's currently the Executive Director of Workforce Tulsa. She has 19 years of economic development experience, and when people think that art is superfluous or unnecessary, she has a degree, a Bachelor of Arts in Art History, and then cum laude, followed by a master's in regional and city planning with an economic development emphasis, both from the University of Oklahoma. Let me welcome Shelley.
Good evening. So creative parenting. I didn't know I was a creative parent until I was asked to do this. And then a friend said, you know, creative parenting is just problem solving, and I can do that. So in the beginning, I was 38, never married, have no kids. I volunteered for everyone in Oklahoma City. I restored a bungalow, I traveled, and it wasn't enough anymore. I explored having biological kids, adopting privately, and finally arrived at foster parenting. And that's a very short story. So I asked for 2 girls and got 2 girls and a boy. They were 9, 6, and 3 years old, and they arrived with all kinds of issues. Trinity, my middle child, had 3 violent rages the first day and therapeutic foster care the next day. Milton ate until he vomited, and Nicole called me a mean white bitch and wrote pornographic notes to boys in the 2nd grade. On little flowered post-it notes, by the way. That was the beginning of a lot of let go of the vision I had of what parenting looked like. It no longer included picket fences or a husband. It still does not involve magical Mother's Days or Christmases. It also meant accepting that my kids may spend their lives in and out of psychiatric care, never be able to support themselves financially, or leave my home. I'm going to talk about the key strategies that I use with kids, though I wasn't really aware of them until I was asked to put this presentation together. First, I was remarkably ignorant, which benefited me. A large part of my career has been doing strategy for startup companies, and many times the most successful entrepreneurs are the people who have not been to business school and thus have no clue how hard it's going to be to start a business. I was equally ignorant about parenting, and I think there's some freedom in being seriously ignorant and being forced to use your wits in desperate situations. So when the kids came, I continued doing the single girl thing. I took them to sit down restaurants and the Oklahoma City Art Museum and estate sales because I didn't know I was not supposed to. They stayed up till midnight on New Year's Eve in downtown Oklahoma City, which I don't recommend. I eventually realized the most impact I would have on my kids was as a role model, which is completely terrifying and weighs on me every day of my life. When my oldest had lived with me a couple of months, she was irritated that I worked 30 minutes away from daycare and asked, why can't you work at Arby's or someplace? 6 months later, she was walking around with a bag on her shoulder and a fake cell phone to her ear saying, yeah, I think I can make that meeting. I'm not convinced that's an improvement over Arby's, but it did demonstrate to me that a little exposure can open up a world for kids like mine. I also fight for my kids, even when they might be totally conning me, which is pretty often. They have advanced conning skills because they had to survive their early lives. So I have embraced being the bully's mom. When I get the call from the other parent, they're always really nervous, and when they realize I'm a decently compassionate person who's not going to curse at them, they're shocked and relieved. I cross boundaries when appropriate and have to make really difficult decisions. My first day as a foster parent, my middle child had 3 violent fits that required me physically restraining her, and after multiple unreturned calls to our DHS caseworker, I finally left a voicemail for her explaining that I was a graduate of Leadership Oklahoma City and that I had the director of DHS's home phone and I would call him there on a Saturday night if I didn't hear back from her in 10 minutes. I do not, in fact, know him or have his number, but I did get a phone call and I did get results for my kid, and that was the beginning of a lot of creative parenting regarding DHS. I've institutionalized my middle child multiple times, always via the Tulsa Police Department. There is nothing more difficult than asking police officers to chase down and handcuff your beautiful 10-year-old, but I've done it multiple times now. Now she's in a specialized unit where she will live for 12 to 18 months. When my oldest daughter is doing reckless or damaging things, which is fairly often now that she's 14, she lives in the garage. Then she has epiphanies. My husband was horrified the first time, but the alternative is that she continues the remarkably reckless behavior and ends up as the victim of human trafficking or worse. So the garage seems like a good alternative, and for now it works. As you've likely noticed by now, my kids are black, which leads me to race, which I could write a whole presentation on. Let me say, unbelievably, our biggest issue regarding race has been hair. If you haven't seen Chris Rock's Good Hair, please watch it. After weekly run-ins with strangers who would walk up to me and my kids to tell me how awful their natural hair looked, I finally designed cards to hand to people and walk away. Has that shown yet? Did you guys see the card? You will in just a minute. So I've talked to you about me, and now I want to talk about the village it takes to raise my kids. I've learned to rely on people, which I really didn't do before I was a parent. I do a lot of crowdsourcing of parenting strategy. I use Facebook and Twitter and foster adoptive parents. Also, I married a fabulous man who is right there in the second row. Wave. So, ladies, if you want to read out your eHarmony prospects, just note in your profile that you're 40, curvy. Oh, this is the card. So I'll let you read that. So we hand this out so that my 14-year-old doesn't accost people, because it's gotten to that point and I was afraid she was going to get hit. So we give this card out now and walk away. So regarding eHarmony prospects, just note in your profile that you're 40, curvy, never married, and in the process of adopting 3 troubled foster children, and that cuts down to the guys who contact you to ask you how many times you visit the gym. I've been fortunate to have great jobs with people who get it, so that when I did have to institutionalize my child for the first time, my boss said in a heavy Southern accent, "Well, hell, I think that's a good reason to take a day off." And finally, my sweet extended family, who supports all my crazy decisions. So the last thing I do is behave obnoxiously, because there are lots of parents out there with kids like mine who don't feel comfortable being obnoxious. I do interviews, thank you to Jenny Graham, I have a blog, I call legislators, I've lobbied heavily to be on this Governor's Citizens Task Force, I think so heavily that I've been blackballed. Which brings me to my final point, which is the number of foster kids in the system is rising. We put more women in prison per capita than anywhere else on the planet, and their kids end up in foster care, drug and alcohol, mental abuse. Care services are nearly non-existent, and there are lots of parents out there who won't be able to find work without serious training. So please keep that in mind as you go through your lives here in Oklahoma. Thank you.